giro del espacio-tiempo, les damos la bienvenida a La Oveja Eléctrica para hablar del papel que juega la cultura en la elaboración de la ciencia.
¿Qué tal, Pepe?
¿Qué tal, Silvina?
Pues mira, cuando hablamos de la cultura abierta de la ciencia, es porque en ella se expresan pensamientos plurales, formas distintas de abordar los problemas.
La ciencia hoy en día se basa en el intercambio de información, en equipos multidisciplinarios que aportan una gran diversidad de perspectivas en la exploración de la naturaleza.
Pepe Gordon conversa desde Israel con el físico nuclear Daniel Seifman, presidente del Instituto Weizmann, un centro de investigación de vanguardia a nivel mundial sobre la mirada multicultural de la ciencia en el siglo XXI.
You are a physicist. When you come here and you see the range of research that is being done here, what amazes you as a scientist in the model you're having to tackle the problems, to try to do research, and what kind of research really blows up your mind?
Well, personally what amazes me is that even though we all work in a very narrow field because things are becoming so complex that we all become experts in very small issues.
Yes.
Which is a dangerous fact sometimes. And if you open your eyes, and as a president of this institute, this is what I have the ability to do here, you find out that actually people in completely different projects, in completely different fields, are actually hitting the same issues. And there's a lot of common ground between very different fields of science. You might look at today, for example, biology and mathematics and the interface between the two, and you can see how these things could merge, something which I would say 20 years ago would be unthinkable. So what amazes me is that even though there's a huge array of problems and people deal with completely different issues, very often you recognize that they're very much the same. And even more sometimes, that if you really keep looking in your own field, you're going to miss the solutions that they've been developed somewhere else. And so, we are always trying to have these people working together so that they can share ideas. And just by talking, exchanging information, they'll discover that you also have that problem, I also have this problem. Let's work together. And at the very beginning, you would not think that these two people would work together because the field is so different. So you should never assume that things are unconnected. There's huge connection, and the connection, of course, is nature. By the end of the day, all what we do is trying to use the power of nature and what nature offers to transform it for the good of the humanity. I mean, if you look at the camera which is looking at us today, this is made of atoms from nature that's been transformed using very sophisticated tools into an instrument that is useful. But it comes from what nature has to offer us.
And this underlines the importance of interdisciplinary knowledge.
Yes.
In this way, you have to have also very deep contact with international scientific community, because knowledge nowadays is generated globally, and the tools to communicate between the best researchers is as good as ever has been.
Of course. Communication between the scientists and scientists of different institutions is very important, because a solution of your problem actually be just on the office in the same, on the same floor as yours, but you have no idea it's there. That's one reason. But there's another one, and that's the international part. In international collaboration, not only do you gain from knowledge which has been developed in other parts of the world and from infrastructure you might not have, but you also profit from the different culture. When we say the brain of the scientist, we do not mean only his knowledge, but his culture, the way he sees the world, the way he sees the problem. Now, while we all believe that science is very rational, here's a problem, we need to solve it, even an equation. And it is true that the solution of the equation is the same solution all over the world. The way to approach the problem will be different if you're Mexican or Israeli. And it's not that there's one which is better than the other one, but the fact that we approach it in a different way, because of the different cultures, is a huge advantage. People think differently because they come from different culture. And in science, it's a huge advantage to have people from different backgrounds trying to solve the same problem, because they will approach it in a different way. And I've been myself in situations where I've seen that there are strengths in certain countries that do not exist in other countries. And again, it is not about who is better than the other one. It is just, you know, it's like listening to music. You might like this music or you might not like it. It's a different music. In your own country, you just love it. But it's a different way of expressing your feeling. And that's what happened in science as well. So international collaboration is not only important for sharing knowledge, but for sharing culture. And the advantage is we're all trying to reach the final goal, which, by the way, is cultureless, which is also amazing.
Interesante en verdad el tema de los diversos sabores culturales que se expresan no tan solo en la música, sino también en la forma de abordar un problema en la ciencia. Lo importante, al final de cuentas, es que lo que se logra, el objetivo final, es universal, nos pertenece a todos, se llama conocimiento. Con un giro del espacio-tiempo, estamos de regreso en La Oveja Eléctrica para hablar del papel de la cultura abierta de la ciencia, precisamente para abrir puentes entre distintas culturas.
Pepe Gordón conversa con el físico Daniel Sifman, presidente del Instituto Weizmann, sobre las posibilidades y límites que tiene la ciencia para acercar culturas. Nos encontraremos con algunas sorpresas.
And in this way, science has helped also in diplomatic relationships.
Absolutely.
You have a very interesting story about how relationships between Germany and Israel had a very important point in the scientific community interchange.
Because the end result of science is available to everybody. You develop a new drug, it cures everybody with the same diseases. And it doesn't matter who you are, and it doesn't matter which religion, which language, and what you believe in. So you can use this as an amazing bridge for, you know, bridging the gaps over different cultures. So in the 50s, you know, while there were no relationship, no diplomatic relationship between the state of Israel and Germany, and I think the reasons are well understood why, after the Second World War and the Holocaust, it was even forbidden for Israeli citizens to travel to Germany. The Israeli passport had a stamp saying that the passport is valid for all countries but Germany. Scientists from the Weizmann Institute in the 50s did get in touch with scientists from Germany, actually from the Max Planck Society, and secretly meet and decided to work together. You know, you really have to realize, less than 10 years after the end of the Second World War, for Israeli scientists, Jewish scientists, to work with German scientists is just incredible. But they understood something which is very important, and I deeply believe in it, that science can really be used as a tool to bridge over these gaps. And slowly, they built trust and succeed in convincing, partly, the own government, Ben-Gurion here in Israel and Adenauer in Germany, to meet and to develop ties. And ultimately, this was part of the process that led to the establishment of the diplomatic relationship between Israel and Germany. Today, at this institute, Germany is the country with which we have the largest amount of collaboration, which I think is amazing, because if you look at the starting point, you would not believe that this would be the case. But this is exactly, so it's an extremely powerful tool.
And this happens with art, this happens with music, this happens with culture. And vis-a-vis Palestinian and Israeli scientists, how the situation is right now?
The situation is not yet as good as we would like to have. I would personally like to see more collaborations between Palestinian and Israeli scientists, but there are difficulties to do that. Difficulties that are due to the way the Israeli behave, and difficulties that are due to the way the Palestinians behave. Not the scientists, but the limitations that are imposed on the system for collaborations. Traveling, meeting, and also the amount of, the type of information, not information, but the type of infrastructure we can share. Investment in the Palestinian Authority in terms of science is not yet a major one, and should be improved and should be increased. And so it's not easy to participate in this, to share the knowledge in this way. But I agree with you, and I believe that this should be more intensive and could be used as a tool for collaboration. I want to tell you that when we travel abroad and we meet Palestinian, or even want to tell you Iranian, Syrian colleagues, politics doesn't play any role. Scientists know that they have a unique tool that allows them to speak the same language. And I'm not talking about English, Hebrew, Arabic, but the language of science.
The language of science to understand each other beyond ideologies, beyond...
And it really works. I mean, I have had many meetings like this.
Creo que todos siempre hemos sabido que la música hace milagros para comunicar culturas que tienen grandes diferencias. La ciencia también puede ser un gran instrumento para propiciar encuentros, ya que implica la cultura abierta del pensamiento que permite explorar el mundo que nos rodea con curiosidad, sin fanatismos. Seguiremos conversando sobre este tema, pero antes vamos a la sección Experimentos con Aura Científica con nuestra compañera Aura López. Pues querida Aura, ¿qué experimento nos traes el día de hoy con sabor casero?
Hoy vamos a hacer algo que pareciera imposible, que es meter un huevo cocido en un frasco que tiene la boquilla más pequeña que el huevo.
O sea, ¿quieres meter el huevo a fuerzas?
A fuerza. Lo que vamos a hacer, necesitamos un frasco de leche o de jugo. El huevo cocido es muy importante, por favor, que sea cocido y que le quiten la cáscara, porque de veras que a veces uno no lo piensa y el experimento no sale. Necesitamos un cachito de papel y cerillos. Lo que tenemos que hacer es prender el papel. Aquí, ahorita en este momento, la presión del aire que está en el frasco y afuera es exactamente igual.
Okay.
Y rápidamente tapamos el frasco y mira.
Se absorbe.
Lo que sucede es que cuando metemos el papel, se empieza a calentar el aire de que está en el frasco y se expande. Entonces está caliente. Y después, cuando le ponemos el huevo encima, se cierra y el aire se empieza a enfriar. Sucede que la presión está bajando dentro del frasco y entonces lo succiona.
Sí, es muy bonito. Pues querida Aura, como siempre, muchas gracias por tu presencia aquí en La Oveja Eléctrica. Y bien, después de un corte con un giro del espacio-tiempo, nos vamos al Instituto Weizmann en Israel para hablar de la mirada multicultural de la ciencia en el siglo XXI. Regresamos enseguida a La Oveja Eléctrica. Con un giro del espacio-tiempo, estamos de regreso en La Oveja Eléctrica para hablar de la mirada multicultural de la ciencia en el siglo XXI.
Eso permite apreciar los acentos que cada cultura brinda al conocimiento.
Y de verdad, eso se llama impronta. El zoólogo Konrad Lorenz, ganador del Premio Nobel de Medicina en 1973, plantea que la impronta se da cuando, por ejemplo, los gansos que salen del cascarón establecen una relación con la figura materna. Lo interesante es que si lo que tuvieron ante la vista fue al doctor Lorenz, él se vuelve la mamá de los gansitos, ya que esa imagen se queda estampada en su percepción.
Existen también lo que podrían llamarse improntas sociales, que son las huellas o marcas que se acentúan dentro de la cultura en la que uno nace. Pepe Gordon conversó con el físico Daniel Seifman, presidente del Instituto Weizmann, sobre las improntas culturales del quehacer científico en Israel y sobre los frutos de considerar a la ciencia como el motor de crecimiento de un país.
Dame tu mano, que tengo comezón.
There's this concept of calling imprinting. But what I'm saying in this is when we are talking about cultures, there are some patterns, like you say, that belong specifically to the country, even though it's universal knowledge. I would like to know about some of these traits in Israeli culture regarding science. What makes it unique?
So I think that you have, I agree with you that there are fingerprints that are unique to each country, and it influences the way you do science. So if you want me to describe to you major fingerprints of what Israeli science, I'll tell you. It is the one you see every single day when you're driving on the road. So you've seen how people drive here, which is, I don't want to call this chaos, but it's unorganized, to be, to use a nice word. And of course, it's very dangerous. Not everybody stops at the red light, and not everybody respects the red sign, the stop sign. So that's very dangerous on the road. But if you take that behavior in science, this is a very good behavior. So I would say that what makes Israeli science unique is the fact that the scientists do not believe for a single moment that what has been written and what has been said is correct. And you know, the mind of a scientist or the work of a scientist should always be to ask questions, even about what has been established many years ago. And the Israeli driver does not respect the sign of the road. The Israeli scientist has a deep lack of respect for what has been done before. One can criticize this, but in a way it has the advantage of being able or willing to take risk. Bad risk on the road, good risk in science.
Some of the fruits of this culture, some of the fruits that when you see Weizmann Institute, you say, oh, this is really something that we should be proud of because of what we have been doing.
In my opinion, the first one are the students we're educating. You know, we all talk about science and patents and developing new drugs and technologies, but before that and above that, I would even say, the process goes by training students, PhD students. We have about 1,000 graduate students on this campus. And I think that the biggest impact we had on Israel, on the state of Israel, was to graduate, for more than 50 years, to graduate all these PhDs of science. And in a way participating in the development of this country by changing it from a country which exported oranges many years ago to a country which exports technology today. So for me, this is a tremendous impact on the economy of this country. Usually people forget to measure this, and of course, there are no numbers behind this. But really, remember today, about 50% of the economy of this country is based on high-tech export, high-tech and biotech. You can't do that if you do not educate the people at the highest possible level. So this is one part. And that's very Israeli, of course. It is a contribution to Israel. The second part, which is a contribution to the world, are the many technologies, many drugs, several drugs that are on the market, technologies that are being used. But even more than that, the fact that we participate in this global enterprise, which is nothing to do with Israel and nothing to do to Israeli scientists, and give our share of our knowledge to the world. And I think this is very important for us, but also very important for all the scientists. And ultimately, that's how science developed and technologies have been used. And so we are very happy to be a small part of this whole global enterprise.
And that connects with the dream, a vision that you had in 1934, because even when the State of Israel wasn't born, there was this idea that science would have to play a big role in developing this country.
You're right. I mean, this is still, for me, you know, an amazing question. How Chaim Weizmann, the founder of an institute, knew something that very few people knew at that time. This is what I call visionary. He had this vision that science will be for the benefit of humanity. Now today, when we look at what is happening, it's very clear. We all want better cell phones and faster computer and cars that, with less pollution and drive longer miles for less gas and so forth. And we invest huge amount of money. But in the 1930s, this was not the case. It maybe was the beginning of the case, but was not yet the full scientific revolution. There was not a full understanding that if you invest in science, in research, this will develop the economy. It was a good issue, but not something which was the mainstream. I think that we owe to Chaim Weizmann, the state of Israel, which is today, a technological hub. It's a power, compared to the size per capita, it's an amazing place as far as technology is concerned. We owe it to Chaim Weizmann, who 76, 77 years ago thought that this actually is an amazing force behind the development of a country. It's an amazing idea, and I still do not know from where he could have this high-risk idea.
Curiosity-driven also.
Curiosity-driven education, curiosity-driven research would lead to the development of this country, yes.
Yes. Daniel Seifman, thank you very much for this interview.
La ciencia está hecha de ideas que se adelantan a su tiempo, que nos alumbran a todos. Gracias al motor de la curiosidad, si tenemos visión de Estado, debemos de insistir en el impulso a la ciencia en nuestro país, con nuestro propio sabor, con nuestro propio acento. Me parece muy interesante el color que cada cultura le imprime al arte o a la ciencia. Me acuerdo que en una ocasión, al final de un concierto para violín y orquesta de Brahms, interpretado por una solista china, le pregunté a mi amigo el periodista Pablo Espinosa si había notado alguna impronta china. Me comentó que eso ocurre precisamente en la libertad de la cadenza de esta obra. Poco después, cuando ella fue entrevistada, la solista dijo que la expresión de su alma y de su cultura se liberaba justamente en la cadenza. Tenemos que encontrar cómo impulsamos la ciencia en México con la creatividad y la imaginación de nuestra propia impronta cultural. Gran tema el que hemos tocado el día de hoy. Pasamos ahora a la sección Aguas con la Morsa con el físico Manuel López Michelone. Pues querido Morsa, como siempre, un gusto estar aquí contigo en La Oveja Eléctrica.
Gracias, Pepe.
Oye, fíjate que cuando hablamos de las improntas culturales, aquello que hace único a una cultura, esto también se puede traducir al mundo de la ciencia, como lo hemos visto el día de hoy. Pero por supuesto estamos hablando de características y rasgos que son universales, nada más que tienen un acento peculiar en ciertas culturas. ¿Qué acentos peculiares notas en la cultura de la ciencia en México?
Fíjate, Pepe, habiendo estudiado en la Facultad de Ciencias, me tocó ver todo género de cosas, ¿no?
Ajá.
Una de ellas, que es verdaderamente sorprendente, es lo que pasa en los laboratorios de física de la facultad. De pronto se pide equipo a Estados Unidos, ¿no? Y equipo que es muy costoso. Por ejemplo, se habían pedido 2 cromatógrafos de gases, que son equipos muy, muy costosos. Y se envían así, muy bien cuidados y demás. Bueno, pues llegaron rotos. Los 2 equipos llegaron rotos. Entonces, hay 2 opciones. Una es hacer lo que hay que hacer es, pues, reempacar todo y mandarlo, que lo arreglen o que nos manden otro, ¿no? Lo cual implica 6 meses
De retraso en la investigación.
porque no llegan, ¿no? Y la otra es lo que se hizo. Armemos de los 2 uno. Hagamos uno de esos 2. A ver si podemos rescatarlo. Y efectivamente así se rescató el problema, ¿no? En el camino se perdió uno, digamos. Pero de pronto se improvisó. Entonces, en esta improvisación, yo creo que es un rasgo distintivo de la ciencia mexicana. Por la falta de recursos, porque puede haber recursos, pero tarda tanto en llegar el equipo o los materiales que necesitamos que le rebuscamos y lo hacemos por otro lado. Pero fíjate, toda esta improvisación requiere de un conocimiento atrás. Hasta para improvisar, de verdad, hay que estar preparado.
Eso es hermosísimo y como siempre, querido Morsa, agradecemos tu presencia aquí en La Oveja Eléctrica.
Gracias, Pepe.
Y bien, nosotros pasamos ahora a la sección Veo con Miriam Moscona. Pues querida Miriam, como siempre, un
Pepe.
gusto encontrarnos.
¿Qué tal?
Oye, Miriam, pues hay animales que tienen realmente una muy mala imagen pública, tienen malos publirelacionistas, pero la ciencia se encarga de despejar estos mitos, ¿no?
Te vas a acordar de esta canción de Cricri que dice, che, araña, baila con maña, para adelante y para atrás. Bueno, un científico o un equipo de científicos tiene que ir, caminar como un poco al sesgo. Es decir, muchas veces no es el pensamiento lógico de A, B, C. Muchas veces se sospecha el C y después se investiga, se registra, se documenta el A, B. Y muchas veces así se llega a conocer el adentro de las cosas de afuera.
Y esas cosas de afuera que parecen tan espantosas, realmente se nos revelan como otra cosa tan distinta y tan diferente, ¿no?
Vamos a ver si le tienes miedo al horror.
Yo siempre le tengo miedo a las arañas.
Trepar podría ser una de las actividades más peligrosas que puede realizar una tarántula, que no es otra cosa que una araña grande y pesada, así que no está diseñada para tolerar las grandes caídas. Los científicos llevan tiempo intentando averiguar cuál es el método que utilizan para no caerse cuando caminan por superficies verticales. Diversos científicos de la revista Nature entraron en polémica. A simple vista, en la zona donde se observó a una tarántula resbalar, no se veían restos de seda. Se observaron en el microscopio electrónico y se pudo constatar que tenían en los pies restos de seda sobresaliendo de los pelitos. Tras esa constatación, se hizo lo mismo con tarántulas de otras especies y se observó que también tenían una estructura por la que salía la seda de los pies que les permitía trepar sin mayor peligro. Así que cuando usted escuche la expresión «me extraña que siendo araña te bajes por el elevador», ya sabe por qué. Aunque le causen horror, las tarántulas sí pueden treparse por la pared.
Hoy hemos estado hablando de la importancia de las diversas miradas para generar conocimiento, con la mirada de la poesía en la ciencia, con la mirada de Miriam Moscona, llegamos al final de esta emisión de La Oveja Eléctrica.
Los esperamos en este espacio donde queremos que la impronta de la ciencia quede marcada en la mirada de los jóvenes. Aquí, en Canal 22.
Nos encontramos con Bruno Estañol para hablar de la creatividad tal y como se expresa en la ciencia y en el arte.
Aquí vamos a tratar de descifrar al mundo en La Oveja Eléctrica.
Aquí en Canal 22 vamos a hablar de lo que dice Bruno Estañol. La ciencia trata de explicar lo inexplicable, el arte trata de expresar lo inexplicable.